This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. The modelling amp still has one big problem, I think, and that's what I wanted to talk about in this video because I saw an article which kind of jogged me into thinking about this. So, essentially, the problem is that I don't think there are any artists, major artists, the people that actually have influence, like we can find people reviewing these things and demoing these things on YouTube. Kind of top artists for the Boss Katana on a quipboard are people like Rabia and Ola, who presumably have been paid to demo these things in general, which is not, well, perceptually, that's a word, isn't it? Is not quite the same thing as seeing someone play on a stage in front of thousands of people with it, right? Well, I'm going to challenge that idea a little bit in a minute. But even something like the Fender Tone Master Deluxe Reverb, which I think has gone down really well with a bunch of people, even that, the only artist that I've heard of, that I've seen play it, is Johnny Marr in his studio in a Fender check-in video, which is quite clearly a Fender video where they've asked him, would you play through this thing? That is, to me, I think, the last kind of barrier to people really accepting this stuff, and it's not really moved in quite a lot of years. If you remember all the way back when Alan Holdsworth was using Yamaha digital modelling amplifiers, you know, Alan Holdsworth, a big name for many of us, and certainly influential in terms of tone, you know, and playing and stuff like that. He kind of went between like dual rectifiers and the Yamaha digital modelling stuff. But I can't really think of anyone like that sort of level anymore. I think Meshuggah used to use the Line 6 Veta. They were users of that on their touring stuff. But these days, I think I know of one person from the band Blur who has been actually using these live. So if you want to drop a comment, you feel free to do so, sir. But I've gigged the Boss Katana a couple of times, and the best experience that I had with it was actually using it with a pedal board in front. the reason that I tried that was that I actually compared it to a Fender Vibroverb reissue, like an expensive amplifier. The clean, I just put it all through the same cabinet, and when I got back to my computer to listen to stuff, it was like, well, that sounds pretty much identical. Takes pedals really well, and that was just using the bog standard clean channel with pretty much everything at 12 o'clock. So in terms of taking pedals, I think it does that fantastically well. What I would say is that the one weak point to me, if you could think about it in this way, of course these are made to sell by the boatload, and they're made at a pretty cheap price. I suggest that pairing it with a better cabinet is probably the way to get more acceptable results out of the Katana, and probably this would be the same for the Line 6 Catalyst, I'd imagine. With a lot of stuff, they're putting these together at a certain price point, right? And probably the cabinetry and the speaker might be where you would have like a drop in quality compared to some of the more expensive stuff out there. So the reason that this kind of jogged into my thoughts was this morning I was just went, on Android phones you can go left and you get like news articles. I got an article from Guitar World about an Irish band called Sprints, and I checked them out on Spotify. They've got like 215,000 monthly listeners on there. They released a debut album, and they supported Liam Gallagher, I believe. And what they said, they use a Vox AC15 and a Boss Katana. Those are the two amps, apparently, that between the two guitarists they own. And this is, I think, what you would want to see more of. People that are, creating music, playing on stages around the world, using the things that the influencers tell you sounds just as good as the real thing. Because what does it matter if, Johnny Dickhead is telling you that the Boss Katana sounds really good, if no one of any kind of repute making real music is actually using it? That's the question for me. The other kind of weird thing about this is, though, also that I think in this article they talked about like being in touch with Fender, and I think this is one of the things that is maybe not as well known, or we don't think about. Like, we generally think about like kind of gear reviewers and demos and influencers and that sort of stuff as being, well, they're sent this gear, of course they're going to like it. Well, the same does apply for artists. Once you get a record label, once you get management and stuff like that, you are offered free gear to some extent. Like I know the bass player from Rag and Bone Man, a few people like this. Like, once you're on a stage in front of people, they do want to send you gear, much like if you're in your bedroom playing legato at random times a day, then yeah, companies can start to get in touch with you. So actually, there's huge money in endorsement, and even at the bottom level, there's free gear stuff. But that was kind of my thoughts on this, really. It's like, well, if this stuff really is that good, then why don't we see many artists, talk about things like the Boss Katana or the Line 6 Catalyst? I looked on a Quickboard. There is basically no one that I can tell on there using a Line 6 Catalyst. From my buddy Jake Loosemore, he's got friends over in Nashville. On the bar gigs over there, I think there is a little bit of a growing kind of use of the Tone Master digital Fender stuff. So that's maybe where it's going to start, where you start to see that Fender make this kind of modelling amp thing, kind of normalise it a little bit, because if it's got a Fender badge on it, and it looks like a Fender, it's a proper cabinet with a proper speaker, maybe that is the giving the best impression of what these things can sound like. As I say, for me, with the Boss Katana that I've got, that they sent, obviously, this works best for me when paired with my Mesa Boogie EV speaker, and I've got like a little 1x12. That's for me where I think it shines. And as I say, if I chuck it on that clean channel with my pedals, it sounds and feels great to play. For this particular video, I was using my presets just direct out of the main out of here. The cool thing about the head, and Alec, if you're watching, you did ask why I felt like I preferred this over the Air. The reason is that this literally can be my practice amp. I could use it on a stage, as I have done. It has the 5-watt speaker in here, which is basically quite loud, and works just as well as any desktop amplifier that I've tried. And so that's, for me, why this one would be the thing. The only downside versus something like the Katana Air is that it's a bit heavy and doesn't have wireless, but those are things that personally I don't use. What I do use is things as a backup or things with a real cab, and that for me gets me the best of the Katana experience, I think, anyway. So this is my favourite of the Boss Katana iterations. This is the Mark II head. As I say, for the reason that it has a speaker built in here, so I can just plug into it and practice it. I did take this on holiday once. Also, you can pair it with a foot switch, which is definitely a thing. But this is, I think, the last kind of problem that the digital modelling amp world is going to have, is that you need to get people on stages using them and choosing them even over something like a Vox AC15 or whatever it might be, before customers out there are going to have the perception that these actually compete. Because I think it's considered by a bunch of people to be like a crap option or a budget option, yet they sell by the boatload. But I think there is real good tones within the Katana stuff specifically. I don't know if your opinion might vary on that, but for me, playing that in the intro, I felt like that kind of records really nicely. I also am reminded of the guitarist from XTC, Andy Partridge. I've seen a couple of his articles coming up. Actually used a pod on an album. I feel like there's more of this going on than we know about. And so it's coming out now that, like, people are actually using the Line 6 pod on albums, that were around at the time. I think that is kind of an interesting thing, that even, on pop albums where there's actual budget and stuff like that, you're hearing people using a Line 6 pod. I think we mostly agree that the modelling stuff sounds way better now than it did then, way more flexible, way easier to get great tones. So, yeah, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you've got them. The Gumroad place will be the place to get my Katana presets. I think it's £2 for a bunch of stuff that I put together for the Katana. So give that a try if you want. But yeah, that's the last problem I see for digital modelling amps, is that you need to get the people with real influence that aren't just playing in their bedrooms, using these over something else before I think people really come around to the idea a bit. And it seems like there's been a bit of a backstep on that. If Alan Holdsworth was using modelling amps like 20, 30 years ago, why don't we have people doing that so much anymore? And Meshuggah, again, like 10 years after him, don't see so much of it at the moment. Maybe it's just because modelling has kind of taken over that space. So is there still a space for digital modelling amps? Maybe not so much, because people are totally going towards, well, I don't need an amp at all. I'll just go for a modelling rig, whether it's Axe-Fx, Line 6, Helix, Quad Cortex, whatever. Maybe the amp is less important than it used to be.